Hi, my name is TorLow, and you are watching my midterm submission for EDUC565 with Professor Amy Burton in classroom management. In this video, I'm going to be explaining and identifying my progress towards the course learning objectives, as well as my self-identified personal goal. In this midterm submission, I'm going to be referencing two books. The first being The Art and Science of Teaching by Robert Marzano, published in 2007 by the ASCD. All right. And the second one is Classroom Management by Paul Burden, which is published in 2010 by John Wiley and Sons. All right, so the first learning target was the teacher candidate will be able to develop a plan to manage and monitor student learning. I have learned this through a couple different ways in the class so far, but one being through the reading we did in Burden's Chapter 3, Preparing for the School Year. In this chapter, it talked about managing assessment, record keeping, and reporting. I have developed a plan that I'm going to keep all of my notes and record keeping and attendance and participation notes in Excel because I think it's easier to calculate cumulative grades or averages, as well as add in little notes, and I can back it up as well. So I'm not going to lose any paper copies or spill coffee on it or anything like that. I've also learned how to monitor student learning through different seating charts that they go into in Chapter 3. You know, different ways of being able to always see your students walking around, having the teacher with itness. We learned this concept in your class, Amy, where it means basically having presence all over the room, being kind of aware as you're teaching with what's happening, if students are engaged, if they're understanding, you know, and having kind of those eyes in the back of your head, for lack of better words. So I plan to do a lot of walking around. My teacher's desk, in my management plan that I've developed is actually going to be in the back of the room, but then I'm going to do a lot of my teaching and, you know, have my overhead or Elmo, whatever you call it, whiteboard at the front. But then I hope to engage a lot of my students to be talking and, you know, to kind of walk around to make sure that I'm really engaged with their attention, and that they're understanding with what I'm talking about. I've also learned this concept of managing and monitor student learning by watching Jackie Page's video. We watched that in class, where she's a Washoe County teacher, I believe, but she is basically in this 12-minute video, she does, I think, 10 or 15 different things as students are coming in late with troubles with lockers. You know, she's introducing this experiment they're going to do with the Mentos and Pepsi explosion, but also making sure that she's getting new students feeling comfortable, as well as getting people, you know, attentive and informed with what's happening and holding, you know, students' interest and engagement. She was amazing with that, and I think she had a really good teacher with itness. She seemed to be, in my mind, kind of like a classroom management genius. So the second learning target is the teacher candidate will be able to plan instruction that supports every student in meeting rigorous learning goals in a managed learning environment. I have made significant progress towards this through a number of different ways, but when reflecting back on the beginning of class and we had to put our Post-it on the piece of paper that you drew up for us on what we thought our control approaches were, I actually played it safe and just put it in the middle, but I didn't really. To me, I just associated the high control with kind of like a authoritarian type style of teaching, and I had associated with a negative style just because in my personal experiences, I've never really done well in that type of learning environment where it's so highly controlled that you don't really feel the ability or welcomed questions or having a little bit more of a involvement in the class. You have to just sit and listen to the teacher and abide by her rules or his rules, you know, in order to succeed. So I associated that with a negative stance or approach on controlling your classroom. And, you know, I kind of thought that the low control approach was probably where I'd end up, but I didn't want to go too far in one direction. So now I've actually now that I've developed my classroom management plan through a lot of the things that I'll go into it in a second, sorry about that. I understand the approaches and the different ways how you can control your class and what works at different points. So my classroom management, I believe you told me, Amy, that it is my control approach seems a little bit more progressive. So it took a little bit of low control, medium control, and high control at different times. I believe, from the readings, I learned some of the research and the different examples and what each control actually means in Chapter 2, which is the Models of Discipline by Burden. Marzano went in Chapter 6 into some of the same things, but didn't provide as many examples. It was just kind of a brief overview of things you should, think of and the action steps when preparing your classroom. But I thought the scenarios we did in class was very meaningful to me because you got a good examples and you got to see firsthand how each control approach can be very advantageous for you at different times. I think it definitely depends on the students you have, the different personalities in your class, the learning objectives or the activities that you're trying to introduce and complete. I think it also depends on the time of day, if it's in the afternoon and the students are either a little squirrely, have a lot of energy, or maybe they're a little bit more sleepy, maybe it's the morning and they haven't fully woken up yet. So I think it depends on the teacher and it depends on who you are and the situation at times. So I think I'm definitely going to try to be very democratic with my students and empower them to want to be involved. But I think at certain times I will need to use some of those high control approaches and, monitoring some of the involvement and getting my students to actively be engaged in what we're learning at this time. Let me check my notes here. Another way that I have learned was through the Professor Carol Dweck's video, the TED Talk we listened to. And I thought that was a very powerful video. I really enjoyed she talked about the fixed mindset versus the growth mindset and how we need to teach our students. And I think, so the difference between a fixed mindset and a growth mindset was that a fixed mindset, you believe that you are born with the tools that you're given. And you cannot expand on those. You're either good at math or you're not. You're either good at reading or writing or speaking on a video like this, or you're not. And so it's more of like we're going to teach you this, and whether you know the information or not for the exam, whether you're good at math, whether you're going to score well, or if not, well, I'm not good at math, so of course I'm not going to do well. And she talked about how it's very important to teach more of a growth mindset, which is in a growth mindset way, which is maybe we're not born with those tools, but we can absolutely learn it and progress towards being better at something. You have more of the ability to grow in your knowledge, skill set, mindset, rather than either knowing it or not. And I think it's she goes into using the power of yet. Have you learned that yet? Well, if you haven't, we can teach you the ways, we can give you the tools, how to learn it and how to be better and how to practice, and eventually you can master those things. So I think I'm definitely going to bring that into my classroom. I loved that video. I think she was very powerful, and for obvious reasons, she had left a very good lasting impression on me. So I'd like to implement that in my future teaching and lesson planning. One of the last ways that I have made progress towards learning target number 2 and being able to plan instruction that supports each of your students in learning their goals and managing your learning environment is through the activity we did in class with the voices in the park, the different gorillas and how their personalities and background helped interpret the same situation in different ways. I thought it was a great activity, and I really took away a lot from that in the future. I think when I'm teaching my students, it's important to keep that in mind, that so many people interpret different situations so differently. And so if you can think about that when you're trying to reach each student and trying to ensure that they're learning, the information that you're presenting them and they're taking something away from each of the activities, I think you can pose certain questions. I think you can, help point out certain things that maybe they wouldn't necessarily think of or they wouldn't necessarily notice. So it's definitely something that I'm going to take with me in the future when teaching. And I think it's so valuable to just really be aware of the full situation and, understand your students and what perspective and where they're coming from and how they're learning something. Because if you can understand that, you can be a lot more effective in your teaching. So just to sum it up, learning about the different control approaches, low, medium, and high, and being able to synthesize those into your classroom management plan and how you're going to teach certain concepts, and being able to consistently metacognitively reflect and adjust your approach to better fit the needs of your students and the activity that you're doing. Teaching with a growth mindset and teaching your students the power of yet and giving them the tools they need to succeed, and interpreting those in the way that your students are going to internalize it the best, is all really going to help me in being effective and planning my instruction and managing the learning environment so my students can meet their rigorous goals. The third learning target that I've made progress towards is the teacher candidate will be able to reflect critically and systemically about our practice and learn through collaborative inquiry informed by research-based criteria. I think I've made progress to this learning target through two different lessons or activities we did in class. The first being the article on the professional learning community, the PLC. We read through that, and then I think where I benefited the most was the discussion afterwards with our classroom from our collective experiences with the PLC. Before this, I didn't even know what a PLC was. I'd heard the term used, but I wasn't clear on the definition. So I understand that now. And then I thought it was really interesting how some of the past experiences that the other students in our class have had and how negative they were, but it was really interesting to hear why they were negative and to understand what it was and where the kind of the lack of effective collaborating was happening. So I think what I've taken away from that discussion and what I know now that I will implement into my own teaching is being able to metacognitively reflect and analyze what is working in your teaching practice, what is the most effective, what is the best approach to teaching a certain concept, and then being willing to share it, with your co-educators and being able to talk about what is the most effective and not being complacent or lazy in your teaching strategies, but really not going through just the practice of teaching and just going through the lesson plans, but actually doing what's the most effective, what the students are getting the most from. And I think I will definitely be open to that. It just takes having that experience, and I think I understand what it is and what it takes to make a PLC successful and effective in my own practice. But for me, I need to have more experience of being involved in one of those and having the experience of teaching and what is working and what isn't so that I can share it with my other educators. So I thought that activity was very worthwhile, and I do think that PLCs can be achieved. I think it just takes not being afraid to say, hey, I need some help. I need to know what is working. How do you do this the best? What is the most effective for you? And being able and willing to try those certain things and implement those into your instruction. Let me look at my notes. And the second thing where I've learned this is through the TED Talk video by Dr. Hattie and his extensive research in understanding what is the most important in determining our schools and student success rate. I thought it was really interesting, the activity we did prior, where we listed what we thought was going to be the most effective or the most influential on creating that student and school success. I had it completely backwards, as I think we all did in the class. But I thought it was really interesting how the number one thing that's most effective is that teacher collaborative expertise. So being able to rely on the other experiences of your co-educators, but coming together and being cognitive and being able to critically analyze what is the most influential, what is the most effective in teaching and reaching those goals and getting your students to understand the concepts and your teaching and instruction. So I'm definitely going to adjust my lesson plans or teaching styles and to better fit the needs of my students. And I think it's so important to not underestimate the power of prior experiences, and what you can learn in the future, and what you can take away from past experiences to implement going forward. So I definitely learned a lot from those two things. One more thing I wanted to add in how I've made progress towards learning target number 3 is I have learned so much in this class on not just using the collective experience of your co-educators, but also drawing on the experiences and research from papers, academically sourced papers from either the library in our class, as well as looking up TED Talks. You can find a million. There's way more than I thought in the education realm. As well as using the teaching channel and the different resources for new teachers, for classroom management, for getting students involved, engagement. There's a number of resources for family and school engagement. So there's a lot of things that you can draw on to give you new ideas, to give you answers, to give you the background knowledge to help you make a better effort towards getting students, families engaged, and being an all-around better educator. So I will be taking this with me and using the resources that I've learned to draw on from this class. The self-identified personal learning goal that I identified most with is the teacher candidate will be able to develop a classroom management plan and design a safe learning environment. I think I have most definitely made huge steps towards achieving this. I think I definitely need to kind of critically analyze and do a little bit more with the actual plan itself. We're tonight actually going to workshop those, and I think that's going to be really valuable. I learned a lot from the classroom philosophy workshop, where we shared it with our group seatmates or desk mates, and we got a lot of feedback from that, and I thought it was really interesting listening to other people's and their feedback. I think is so important. So I've learned a lot from that. I also have learned a lot and taken away a lot with the empathy exercise with the poem that you read in class. I thought it set a very sincere tone in the fact that as educators, we are the ones that these parents are raising their pride and joy, their babies, and they're essentially giving them to us to spend, more time sometimes with them than they do as parents. And so we have this huge responsibility to uphold the trust and the responsibility they give us. And so I thought that was just so powerful and moving. And I really enjoyed that activity we did with the letter to our future teacher self from our past student self from the grade we were in. I really enjoyed that activity, and I think it's just so important to create a safe learning environment through acceptance, through having respect, through empowering students with responsibility, and creating a situation in a classroom climate where they feel safe and empowered to want to uphold the expectations that you have for them, and to have that kind of trusting and give and take relationship to better the classroom and to better the experiences that we share together, so that they actually are taking something away from it rather than just memorizing information. So it is so important to establish those relationships. And thinking back now to the activity at the beginning of I think it was the first class, yeah, where we had on one side, do you think it's more important to have just the structure and the information, or do you think it's more important to establish that emotional connection with your students? And I was very much just the knowledge side of it. I didn't think the connections were as important, but I think it's a mixture of both, and sometimes even more the connections. The students are not going to want to learn unless you have that rapport with them and you have invested time and a relationship with them to show that you care about their success and that you're investing your energy and you want them to give as much as you're giving to the relationship to create this effect, this impact, and to pass on this knowledge. And so I think when a student really feels that, then they're going to learn the most in your class, and that's when you're going to be the most effective educator. So that's a huge one. With the relationships, I think the DUEC video, like I mentioned before, the PLCs, Hattie's research in that video, it all goes into creating a successful philosophy and classroom climate, which you can establish through your classroom management plan. I'm halfway there, and I know I have a lot more to learn, but I think this class in general has been very powerful in giving me the tools and ideas and philosophies and just the material to understand and how to develop and the things I need to include. But I think it only comes from, I think I'm halfway there, which we are midterm, but it comes from the experiences that we share and that we talk about, and the collaborative experience really is. All right, this includes my video submission for my Education 565 midterm. Thanks, Amy, for listening to me. I realize I probably use a few crutch words, but it's been fun and super beneficial for me to reflect on what I've learned so far in this course. I'm halfway there, but there's always a lot more to learn. So I look forward to the second half of class, and thank you very much.